Just curious for our listeners if you can help us understand what is portfolio life and why is it important for the leader to lead a portfolio life.
Yeah, I think I have to thank one of my mentors, Mr. Ravi Venkatesan. His latest book talks about it, and I think I would credit him with kind of raising my awareness of why it is important to have multiple things going on. Some of which is monetary. It's a job, it pays you, etc., etc. Doing a great job at it. But there are things that you want to do for your soul or doing other things, right? And I've noticed that this actually helps is it makes you better in every one of those dimensions. So, for example, if I have like my engagement with the larger ecosystem that I do at the industry level, it makes me a better, employee of VMware because I can bring some of those experiences back and say, hey, have we thought about this? This is what's happening in the larger ecosystem. How are we thinking about it for our company? How do we fit into the broader ecosystem? Are we doing the things that are necessary for us to do something more? So it has created some new learnings for me that allows me to bring it back here.
Thank you so much, Ram. Such a pleasure having you here. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you, Gaurav. Thanks for having me on your program.
It took me some time to finally get you on the podcast. So I'm extremely happy that finally you could find some time in your calendar for this conversation. So Ram, let's dig a little deeper in the context that you were born into, the family that you were born into, the school that you went to. What are those traits, those principles, those philosophies that you have picked up during your childhood days that continue to guide you today as well?
Yeah, I think these are two separate things. Obviously every portion of your interaction with the world shapes you. And I was born into a family of my father was a civil servant, and he was from the very first batch of the Indian Administrative Service. My father probably injected in me the openness and the ability to deal with people. I mean, he was always a person who could carry along a lot of different kinds of people with him in the journey that he had. And of course, my mother was a person who was very encouraging, and I think she continues to be a big support person in my life at this point in terms of encouraging me to go beyond what I am capable of doing, and she's always constantly been a big cheerleader in that journey. Obviously, my wife is a big source of support to me now, and encouragement, and also a mirror, right? Sometimes, it keeps you grounded in terms of what is real and what is needed at a personal level. I've had, many different mentors over the years. I mean, I've had, a fairly varied journey in my career, and we can certainly get into that more as we talk about this. And, my philosophy is no experience is a bad experience, and every experience is a good experience. So some experiences are great, some experiences are not so great, but every one of them teaches you something more.
Yeah. This is really interesting. What I heard you saying is that you picked up openness from your father. You picked up going beyond from your mother. And interestingly, if I speak to 10 people, if I speak to 10 leaders from the corporate arena, one of the things which is common is that they have learned being grounded from their wife. I don't know what do wives do that keep the husband grounded.
They don't believe the Kool-Aid that surrounds you.
I know. So it's a difficult question. If somebody would ask me, Ram, I would not have an answer, but would love to hear from you. Who has influenced you the most, father or mother, and how?
No, I don't think I think about it as who more or less, right? So, the way I think about this is we are fabrics of our life. We are really woven through many threads. So I don't know if I can differentiate between who has had a bigger influence.
So Ram, looking at the tapestry of your life, when you're talking about the fabric of your life, I'm sure we all go through certain moments in our life. We all go through certain episodes in this journey that define who we become. What are those few episodes of your life that have helped you become who you have?
See, I think I was a relatively, I would say, a curious child growing up. I felt I was getting some of my early photographs of me as a child, sitting with the Lego blocks or sitting with a Meccano set, kind of noodling around, right? I was probably 4 or 5 years old. So I've always been that, I've always liked that creative aspects of doing things, curiosity, trying out things. And I think that has stuck with me through life. Even today, I think, my ability to learn, unlearn, keeps me, for me, I get bored if I keep doing the same thing over and over again. So for me, I think that part of it has been very important, and it's probably started shaping from very early part of who I was in terms of being able to look at things in a different perspective, try out things, be more hands-on, doing those kinds of things. Now, when I got into a professional career, I think some of those traits continue. One trait I'll tell you, I mean, I was not very comfortable speaking in front of audiences or doing, just going out of my way to meet people and things like that. And those are things that I've had to develop over time. I had to literally put myself in uncomfortable situations. So I would sign up for speaking engagements, which I didn't know much about, or the topic I would not know much about. I started off with smaller audiences, right? More friendly audiences, if you may, right? Got comfortable with, initially of, writing things down, making sure that I knew the points so I wouldn't freeze up, standing up there, at least starting to talk. And that got me more and more comfortable. I watched some of my mentors as speakers, when they spoke, how they carried themselves, how they spoke, right? So I think it's a learning exercise, and you have to deliberately do it. So that's really how I got over my hesitation. The other trigger for me is I became an entrepreneur very early in my life. Nowadays, of course, it's fashionable for high school students to start companies. When I was there, it wasn't that common, right? And for me, and I was in the US, and I had a young family when I got into entrepreneurship, and I had no choice, because to put food on the table, I had to get over my hesitation to cold call people. So it was much harder, because it was literally you're calling somebody on a landline on their office phone, and hoping they'll pick up, and you have to then have a very short window of time in which you have to convey your value proposition and then catch their interest and then convert that into something else. So these were not something, as an engineer, these are last things you do, right? And this again was another impetus to force me to change who I was or learn some new way, skills which I was not comfortable. So my larger point here is, you asked about how you do that, right? My simple answer to that is, you have to identify some uncomfortable scenarios that you want to, you force yourself into. You may not be great at it to start with, but over time you get comfortable doing it. It just becomes muscle memory that it becomes who you are.
Yeah, sail through that, as they say. And what was the trigger for you to leave entrepreneurship and join the corporate again?
Couple of things, right? One, I was doing it in a time which was probably entrepreneurship was still not very prevalent, particularly where I was physically located. I was in the Detroit metropolitan area, and I was in the auto industry in those days.
Yeah.
And so one of the realizations that I started getting was, it was okay. It was paying the bills. It was, it was moderately successful, I would say. I won't say it was like, inordinately successful. But I started realizing there were some gaps in my own, experiences that would have suited my entrepreneurial journey, which took me to do my MBA, right? So I did my, as I had already been 9 years in the workforce working when I went back for my MBA. And the reason I did my MBA was essentially because I realized that I did not have enough exposure to areas like marketing, finance, right? Strategy. And so I could, there are two ways you can learn, right? You can either take a formal education like an MBA, or if you're lucky enough, you are working in an environment where you can pick those traits up. So that was my trigger to do my MBA. Now, coming out of my MBA, I had a choice, and this was late. I was graduating in 2000. So I was interviewing in 99, end of 99, where the .com boom was at its peak. And so, so my thought was, hey, I could go work in a company which was where I could learn and practice some of the skills that I had learned in my MBA, and then come back out of that back into entrepreneurship. But fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know which way to look at it, but I landed up at a company which gave me so much in terms of exposure to many different things. I was at Microsoft, and that's a whole discussion by itself. How I chose Microsoft at that time, but my thought was that, right. So this was a company that I thought I could go learn some of the skills that I needed, and then cycle back out. But Microsoft is a great company. I was part of two internal startups at Microsoft, and then that gave me an opportunity to learn some of these skills in the construct of a larger organization. But it was an internal entrepreneurship, if you may, right? So what I started enjoying doing was doing these V1 kind of roles within larger organizations, or a turnaround scenario, right? I mean, that's the other big challenge. I've also had the opportunity to turn around businesses in my career, and both are equally entrepreneurial, if I may, right? You don't have to go start your own company to be entrepreneurial. You can have a V1 mindset, as Bezos calls it, every day is day one, right? If you come in with that kind of a mindset, and if you're entrepreneurial by nature, and you think about these things from a different perspective, and things like that, there's enough and more to be done even in some of these larger organizations.
Precisely.
And I think I've enjoyed doing that. So anyway, I think about myself as an entrepreneur trapped in a large organization, but I think doing entrepreneurship has its own skill set. You don't necessarily lose a lot of the kind of the traits that you would want as an entrepreneur, or think like an entrepreneur, but navigating it through a large organization is not an easy problem. If you can do that successfully, I think the payoffs can be much larger than, sometimes than doing your own company or your own start. Nothing wrong with that. But this is also equally sometimes
different choices, different benefits, different results. You spoke about turnaround scenarios. If you can just share one of those turnaround scenarios that you have experienced,
of course.
And what worked, what helped you to bring that turnaround, and what did not work? What are those lessons that you still cherish?
One of the roles I've done was I was VP of product management in Yahoo at a time when that company was going through a lot of gyrations. Yahoo had these assets, what they called commerce assets. So things like shopping and travel, real estate, anything that was e-com kind of related, purchasing, transactional businesses. And these had kind of fallen by the wayside. And I was challenged, along with another senior leader who was my partner on the engineering side, to take over these businesses and bring them, kind of inject some revitalization into them. And when we looked at them individually, these were all, they were very good businesses, from a potential perspective, but they had kind of fallen by the wayside. So we turned that around, right? It was, when we took it over, it was less than probably $200-300 million collective businesses. We resurrected it over a period of about 18 months, and brought back not only the revenue number, and revenue is an outcome, but we were able to turn around these businesses, revitalize them, get them back front and center in terms of the audience mind share, market share, and then be able to drive this up the curve. That was one. Second, over time, I also was asked to take on the search part of Yahoo. And if you can remember the times when Google was on its surgence, right? I mean, today, of course, Google is de facto has won that battle. But in those days, there was still room for, Yahoo was still a contender for the search space. But this was a dwindling asset. I mean, every month was, search share was getting lost. And when I took it over, it was every month we were losing about a percentage of market share. And in those days, a percentage market share translated to roughly about $450 to $500 million of revenue for every point of market share, right? These are very large businesses. One of the things that we had to be very creative in how you turn it around. And of course, the search, Yahoo had done a deal with Microsoft to run the back end of search for Yahoo. So we had the front end of search. Now, this is where the customer experience had to come in. So one of the things we landed up doing was he said, hey, what assets do we have in our disposal that can actually change how customers will view search from Yahoo? And that was a collaborative exercise that we had to bring multiple parties to the table to actually start to build cohesion. So I had these, I mentioned to you about these commerce assets that we have, like shopping, travel, etc. And then there was search. And what we landed up doing was we started creating a unified experience around search that if, let's say you were going to travel and you were looking for, you typed in the search box saying, show me, with places to see in, Miami, Florida,
Mm.
right? We would not only show you places to see in the search results, but we would actually show you a booking engine for your flight ticket that said, hey, you're looking for Miami. Here's, you can book your flight right here. Or if we knew that you were going to Miami or to the beach, right, we had a shopping portal from which we could actually bring in shopping related suggestions for somebody within the search experience. So hey, I want to buy swimsuits because I'm going to the beach. I could do that right from within search, right? So what happened then was it changed the way people looked at Yahoo search differently than Google search. And it allowed us to actually start to revitalize search, and we turned it around. So not only did we arrest the growth, arrest the loss, but we were able to turn around the business and start increasing market share back. So, again, none of this would have happened if it wasn't a collaborative exercise. If we didn't kind of go back to first principles and say, okay, how do we want to think about this problem? And then come back with answers.
Yeah. So what I'm listening is that, at the core of the entire experience was the customer experience, which has to be unified experience that you were trying to create. One of the things that you would give weightage to is what we call as the collaborative approach. Now, today, look back, what are those few mindsets? What are those traits? What are those approaches that helped you to put this together?
It starts with a shared purpose. So if you have a group of people that you're trying to bring together, rather than jumping into solving problems, you need to be able to define very clearly and collectively agree on what and the why. What are we trying to achieve? What is the problem we are solving? What is the problem worth solving? And why do we need to solve it? What will change if you solve it well? So what? The kind of the so what question. It really needs to be agreed upon and handled, which means that as a leader, you need to build a very sharp purpose statement that is well understood and agreed upon by the people that you're trying to address. Okay, so that's the starting point. Then from that stems, once everybody's agreed on and is signed up for a purpose, then it's a question of working through the details and understanding what you have at your disposal. You mentioned customer centricity. Of course, that's super important because at the end of the day, they are the people you're trying to cater to. But there is also a business imperative, right? What is the business imperative that you want to achieve? And how does it line up against the customer opportunity and the outcomes that you want to derive? Because those two have to match. You can have a business outcome over here, and then you can have a customer's expectation over here. They don't come together in some way. And I think that's where the purpose statement really adds up, because the purpose is what bridges between what you want to deliver and what is it that you want to achieve from a business perspective. Bring that together and say, here's what we're trying to do. Here's why we're trying to do it. Now let's go address how do we want to do this? Because how can have multiple avenues? And the touchstone that tells us which is the better avenue to choose is based on the first two parts. Right? So that's how everything comes together.
Yeah. So what I'm listening is, Ram, that at the core of it, it's the purpose. Why are we doing what we are doing, and making sure that we all are aligned. The entire team is totally aligned with the purpose. And then on one hand, what we are talking about is the business imperative. And on the other hand, we are talking about the customer centricity. If we can put this three together, we'll be able to drive the business and navigate through the difficult times. Is my understanding right?
That is correct. Because you also have to, have enough flexibility in there. Because as things could change, right? Things can change so rapidly on both sides that you have to be able to ensure that your touch points, you're periodically revisiting that purpose statement to make sure that things are still aligned.
Yeah. In fact, that was the question I wanted to ask you. Let me still ask you that question. Ram, during that journey, what was the most difficult part for you to change within? How you were coming in your own way, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, the good question. And I think sometimes you jump in and you have your own biases in terms of what needs to be done, right? You think you have the answers. And sometimes it's a pressure that you put on yourself saying, as a leader, I am supposed to lead people and I need to come up with all these answers myself and then get everybody bought into it, right? And I think my big learning out of that was you don't have the answers. And you have to be comfortable saying, I don't have the answer. Let's go figure this out together. And then start opening up the dialogue, right? Reach out to people, start, listening, really truly listening to what others have to say, not hearing them for the sake of hearing, right? Really truly listening, still your mind because they may have points of view which could be very valuable. And you may be missing the bigger picture and the point. You may have a point of view, but you need to hold it, relatively lightly because the other's input matters at some point to make sure that we can work it together, right? And I think those are the kinds of things that I picked up in my, in those leadership crucibles, if you may, right? It's
Thank
testing
you.
by fire, and I think that's where I have learned to, change myself to that I can bring the people together around a joint outcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ram. Help me understand, Ram. Fast forward 2023. What is it that you were expecting as a byproduct of being at a CXO position that you have not yet experienced?
Oh, I don't know if I went in with any expectations, to be honest. I had some experiences that I thought I could bring to the table. But what has surprised me is the new learnings that I've had over the last 5 years. And that learning is how to look at beyond, as a product leader, my role was product, right? I didn't have to worry about a lot of other things. Somebody else was there to take care of, other areas. But my role here has shaped me in a slightly different way, and it's enabled me to think around a broader set of dimensions at a company level, because we are a fairly large organization here in India as a percentage of the larger company, and so it has allowed us to allowed me and my my compatriots here to look at this problem much more wider, right? In terms of looking at it from the angle of course, customers and product. And as a technology company, that is our lifeblood, is innovation and customers. But also the talent dimension, right? How do you think about talent? Not in a narrow way that you want a set of people to run a business outcome for a line organization, but think about talent management in a broader way, DEI in a broader sense. Think about ecosystems and partnerships and branding in a very different way. And then, of course, think about governance, compliance, policies, etc. These are things that I had never had to worry about in my past, in my previous experience. So it was a new set of experiences. But when you talk about being a CXO, right, now that has also helped me kind of step away from saying, okay, I'm a line leader, to saying I'm a CXO type of a leader, because it has shaped me by giving me that exposure to a wider set of dimensions, which I did not have exposure to.
Yeah.
So if I look back and I say, hey, what were those expectations that I had coming into the role? Probably not, because I didn't know what I didn't know. I think the point I made earlier about being open to experiences, take it as it comes, listen to it, don't force it, just let it come to you, and then based on that you create things to be done. I think that has allowed me to be successful in the role that I am in now, and I've had a hand at kind of setting up the organization.
Just curious, don't you find it overwhelming? Don't you experience any kind of anxiety? Because if you look at the world where we are living in right now, the average age of a C-suite executive is reducing. So on one hand, that's happening. On the other hand, there's so much to learn. And as you said, that at one point in time, I did not have to worry. And now I'm learning. How do you deal with that kind of overwhelm, anxiety, and how do you stay relevant?
Well, first of all, I don't have any anxiety. I don't have any anxiety about becoming redundant, right? Sure. I mean, at some point, you may my philosophy is very simple. Either you will outgrow your job at some point, or your job will outgrow you. And in both cases, there is disruption, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's an anxiety at all. The way I look at it is, like I said, few traits that have helped me stay open, right? There's new things always coming up every day. Some of it is noise, some of it has potential. How do you start to differentiate? What is your personal framework that allows you to differentiate the noise from what may not be noise, right? So keep that in mind. Second is, I don't feel any different today than the day I started working. And this is my 35th year of being in the being a professional, right?
Wow.
So today I don't feel any different today than I did when I started my career as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old that I was. Okay. So I don't feel any different. So then the question is, what is there to be worried about? Now, the question in my mind, and I think this is where I tend to spend some time thinking about, and I am a person who likes to do new things over time. So, every role I've taken in my past while there are some experience I can draw upon, I've always taken on roles which are completely different than what I've done in my past. Any role that I take on, give me 90 days, I'll be productive. So I fully anticipate that I'll be reinventing myself and my career over the next few years, right? I will. That is, that's a given. So to me, the age doesn't play a role in that. The age is a number, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, there are some realities as you get older. Your energy levels may not be the same as what it was when you were in your 20s, 30s, or 40s. But some leave that aside for a second, right? Every other piece doesn't change. You still have to stay relevant in terms of understanding. I say relevant for myself. I'm not saying relevant because I need a job, right? And how do you add value to others and continue to do that? So I love engaging in the larger ecosystem. As you know, in addition to my role at VMware, I also am part of the NASSCOM Executive Council. I chair the NASSCOM's Product Council. So all of those keep me refreshed. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me, plugged into what is going on around me. And it gives me an ability to take the learnings that I do and test it out with people, right?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ram. I've got two questions. One is when you're talking about that you continue to get involved in other things as well. For example, you spoke about NASSCOM, and I remember last time when we spoke, you spoke about it's important to have a portfolio life. That's one part of it. The second part, you spoke about that in 3 months' time, you become productive. Now, let me just ask the second question first, and then I'll come to the portfolio life. When you get hired at the senior position, and now when you are hiring people at a senior position, how and on what basis do you measure the progress of those people on a daily basis? Because those people are at a higher salary package, every day is important, and if they are not doing anything, the company is going to bleed.
I think, I always approach these interactions as a learning exercise. In fact, even going through the interview process is a very critical part. A lot of people treat interview as it's like a root canal, right? You have to go through it to get a job. For me, it's not that. For me, it is about, the interview process at this levels is really a conversation to understand both sides. Which is, I tell them, look, don't put pressure on yourself for the first 90 days. There is no accountability in the first 90 days other than making sure that they're getting the space to go have the right conversations, learn, understand, and then but I keep track of it, right? In the sense that I ask them for that 30, 60, 90-day update. The end of 90 days was when we would sit down and start chalking out what the business outcomes that we want that person to be doing.
Got it. Let's flip the tables now. Let's assume somebody is joining your team. As a leader, what are your responsibilities to provide a space where the person can flourish? And how would you hold that person accountable?
So I give them the exact same advice I take myself, which is, of course, I need to make sure that they're coming in, when they go through the interview process, that one, they have had a good experience doing it, because they're meeting the right type of diversity of interviewers who can add value to them as much as we can test the person for their fit into what we are trying to do. So we have a fairly clear picture of what we are hiring for and what this person's role would be coming in, right? So it's not a random hire that you would do. Second is, how do you onboard them, effectively, right? Ensuring that they have all the tools necessary for them to get going. So are they being given the right context coming in, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I love it when you said that the clarity of why we are hiring this person. It should not be a random hire. The second one is you spoke about onboarding, making sure that we provide the right context, we provide the right tools, and we make sure that the person speaks with the relevant people in the organization so that the person get the diversity of experiences. And then 30, 60, 90 days reporting, what is it that you're learning and who else should I be connecting you with? Thank you. Now, as a leader, Ram, in your day-to-day practice, how do you ensure that you are building a culture of growth and progress?
My style is non-interfering in some sense. Okay, I mean, especially with senior people. I'm definitely not a micromanager. I like to let people operate, especially senior people, give them the space to be, to be creative about how to do things. Of course, I'm always available to help, to brainstorm, to guide, to coach, all of those things that you want to be able to do for people, right? But I like people stepping up coming up with their own methodologies on how they want to go. We agree on a problem to be solved. We agree on something to be done, right? And I'll hold them accountable for the outcome in the sense that, even if it doesn't work out, there needs to be enough learning that comes out of the exercise that we can use to either pivot, what we're trying to do, or we may decide not to do it, but at least there's some learning that comes out of it that can be used somewhere else. So that part of it is non-negotiable. Okay. Success and failure is really a set of things that, how are they approaching the problem? How are they actually going to solve it? Which is, but I let them go do it, right? It's not something that I'm going to be micromanaging them on what is going on, etc. We have agreed upon milestones. We have agreed upon outcomes that we want to derive, but there is a path to those outcomes, and how are things going during that path? So I keep track of that. Right? It's not about calling them up periodically to say, hey, how things going. So we set up time and space to have those conversations.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very, very relevant, especially when you spoke about that providing space is more important than micromanagement. And something which is non-negotiable is holding people accountable, periodically revisiting what's working, what is the learning. Success may happen, success may not happen. But at the same time, for as long as we are either hitting the nail on the head or we are extracting learning, and that is important. Now, Ram, having walked this path for almost like 35 years, what thing are the myths that people tend to carry at your level, which are absolutely not true?
I think the first thing you have to realize as your senior leader is you are not in control and you can't be everywhere. You have to build the capacity and capability in the organization to take things forward. Even in this role, when I came in, the CEO of our company at that time, who my conversation with him, I said, what is your expectation of me? And his answer was very simple: build leadership. And that's a very open-ended statement. In hindsight, I think that was a very profound statement, because as a senior leader, your number one job is to build capacity and capability in the organization at various levels. Okay. And leadership is not a title. Leadership is not it's not a entitlement. Leadership is a set of capabilities that you build in people to take things forward, have the courage to stand for what they believe in, and be able to take along people with them, right? And I'm being very careful here, because sometimes leadership is associated with a title or a managerial role or something else. But, one of the things that is, you asked me earlier about what has kind of surprised me sometimes. It is about people, irrespective of their age, professional age in some sense, right? I'm not talking about physical age, but just professionally, how long they've been in the workforce, etc., is not necessarily a bearing on their leadership capabilities. If you put people into the right scenarios, give them the right latitude and empowerment, and give them the right air cover, sometimes people surprise you in a positive way. They step up. We've had scenarios where we've had people who are relatively junior in the workforce who have stepped up and taken on responsibilities, which was, which some of us would look at it and go, hey, this is like hitting, way above their weight class, right?
Yeah.
But there have been other situations on the flip side where you have somebody with a certain title or a level who probably doesn't step forward, who doesn't take on leadership capability. They are more a manager, right? And I differentiate a manager from a leader. Not that both are not important, but they don't necessarily show leadership traits of being able to take things over and above their day job, take on things with courage, go drive things in the organization, manage by influence, various other traits that you would associate with leadership. So I think, anyway, so those are things that, I look for and I have consciously do, is to how do we build more capability.
Yeah. You mentioned that you look at manager and a leader from through a different lens. What is that one or two mindsets that differentiates a manager from a leader?
Courage. A manager sometimes follows orders, right? They have a set of delivery mechanisms or outcomes that they've been asked to do, and use their teams to make it happen. They do that, right? But I think a leader shows a large trait of courage, being able to speak up, bring up things which are not necessarily popular, to be able to bring it forward for the right reasons. I'm not saying just for creating noise, but in the ability to step forward and say, look, I'm going to take charge of this. I don't care what it is, but like I said, managers who show leadership capabilities will go far in their careers because
Mm.
they just have that extra dimension to them
Yeah.
that people would resonate with and be looked upon, favorably when somebody is being considered. When you consider two people for a same role, the next level,
Mm.
right? What would
Mm.
differentiate them? There's one
Yeah.
person who's very successful at getting outcomes, delivery, right? There's
Mm.
another person who's good at that, but shows that extra dimension of bringing new ideas to the table, be able to get people charged up and resonate around a purpose, be courageous about putting forward their ideas to others and take it forward, drive collaboration in a larger organization. Those
Mm.
people stand out. And I think to
Yeah.
me, when you choose between the two, those dimensions are what kind of identifies somebody as to be ready for the next.
Yeah. Yeah. During the last conversation and today as well, you spoke about that you have been involved in several other initiatives. And you
Mhm.
spoke about last time you spoke about portfolio life. Just curious for our listeners if you can help us understand what is portfolio life and why is it important for the leader to lead a portfolio life?
Yeah, I think I have to thank my one of my mentors, Mr. Ravi Venkatesan. His latest book talks about this, and I think I would credit him with kind of raising my awareness of why it is important to have multiple things going on. Some of which is monetary. It's a job, it pays you, etc., etc. Doing a great job at it. But there are things that you want to do for your soul or doing other things, right? And I've noticed that this actually helps is it makes you better in every one of those dimensions. So, for example, if I have like my engagement with the larger ecosystem that I do at the industry level, it makes me a better employee of VMware because I can bring some of those experiences back and say, hey, have we thought about this? This is what's happening in the larger ecosystem. How are we thinking about it for our company? How do we fit into the broader ecosystem? Are we doing the things that are necessary for us to do something more? So it has created some new learnings for me that allows me to bring it back here.
Ram, help me understand. You use that you have had few mentors in your life. At your level, why do you need a mentor or a coach? Just curious.
Well, you need a sounding board. Like again,
Mm.
like I said, some conversations you can't have with your peer group or people who work for you. Right? I mean, it
Mm.
is natural because it could be something that you need validation on or you're trying to validate and you need somebody else you can go have a conversation. A safe
Mm.
space. Now, of course, I think there's a difference between a coach and a mentor,
Mm.
and I think it's very important to differentiate that. To me, a mentor is somebody I can go have an agenda-less conversation in some sense, right? Somebody who I can openly go and have a conversation on a certain topic, and they're good at it. I know that they have either demonstrated it in their life that I can go have that conversation. Whereas to me, a coach is somebody who can help me improve on a certain dimensions that I have or a certain, you know, a blind spot that I have that I want to overcome. And the coach can help me do that, work with me much more deeply to kind of overcome some other dimension. I think these are two different people, but I think they're very important. Both are important, equally important in some sense, right? But
Yeah.
as a, look, I mean, nobody has ever arrived. I mean, it doesn't matter how senior you are, it doesn't matter how big you are in terms of your, portfolio you're managing or the organization you're managing or, whoever you are. There's always things that you need somebody to go, get your feedback from, right? And so I think a set of mentors is required for you to be able to do that. Now, of course, some
Mm.
mentors are you may decide at some point or some of the relationships may atrophy over time, but keeping them in your broader network is still important because at some point you need to be able to do that. But I'll tell you one more thing, Gaurav, it's very important. See, we can always be take, right? In the sense that you are always looking for your mentor, blah blah blah, right? But I have had situations where the mentors come to me as a reverse mentor and say, okay, hey, I'm struggling with this, how can you help? So so I think it's a symbiotic relationship, and you have to
Yeah.
open yourself up because I've also seen some people who are very, you know, who come who approach relationship as a single one-way channel, right?
Yeah.
They need something, so they go to somebody. I think it's very important, and need not be, like I said, it may be a symbiotic relationship with a mentor where you play mentor role to each other, but that could be
Mm.
one. But it is also very important for you to be a mentor to others, right? Open up
Yeah.
yourself as a channel for others to come meet you
Precisely.
and learn. And frankly, the mentorship where I've been a mentor and working with my mentees, I have learned a lot in some of those interactions myself.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's important for you to help when you're helping somebody, watching their scenarios unfold is a big learning experience for you also, right? In terms
Mhm.
of what could be how to handle something.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think while you are
And
sharing what your experience is, you reflect and it provides you a lot of nourishment where you can say, "Hey, you know what, this is how I could do it differently." Now, Ram, you spoke about you've always been a curious child in your earlier days. You still
yeah, I
have
still
those
am.
photographs of that's exactly where I'm coming to now. What are you curious
Yeah.
about now at this stage, at
It
this phase of your life?
curiosity is not something that it's you turn it on and off periodically, right? It's something that is constantly bubbling all the time. I read a lot. I read a lot of books, and right now, actually, I'm kind of learning about the whole molecular biology space. Okay, because there's
Wow.
so much happening. So I've been reading books on that topic. Whether it's DNA, RNA, all the, I had no exposure to something like that. So I've been kind of educating myself on what, because you hear so much about what's happening in the whole health tech and genome space and all these other things. So again, I pick some topic like that, and I like to learn about it. Right? Not it may or may not be useful, but it at least gives me a chance to learn something new. I'm being in the tech space, every day is a new day. Now, of course, the whole AI discussion
Precisely.
suddenly got rebooted. There's so much of euphoria that is bubbling up. So we also, say, okay, again, this point about noise versus reality, right?
Yeah.
Or what is really material versus what is
Mm,
not. Curiosity is not something that it's only one dimension. Curiosity
mm.
itself is, how do you feed it, right? How do you nurture it? How do you nourish it?
Yeah.
And then what do you get out of it?
When there's lots happening and the world is going through some really difficult phase, right? I think that's the worst that at least that I have seen in my life. So many layoffs happening
Yeah.
all around. How do you ensure security for your team members?
Look, I mean, I've been through enough of the ups and down cycles in in
Mm,
my career. Okay. And every down cycle looks worse than the previous one. I can trace back to the many different recessions when I was working in the US, the dot-com bust, right? The 2008 financial crisis, and now, of course, the whole economic potential recession that is looming its head, and its associated downturns. Now, is layoff the only way? Maybe not. Do I agree with every single layoff decision that happens? Probably not. But it is the reality of the industry that we work in. It happens. Now, one of the things I encourage people is, and this is the point I was making earlier, you can either stay anxious, right? I mean, obviously there is a lot of anxiety, and it's easy for me to say it compared to how everybody's personal situation is. Obviously, everybody's got their own, realities to live. The way to mitigate it is, this is where I think it's very critical for everybody individually to ensure that they are they are keeping up with what is going on. They don't fall back on a comfort zone that suddenly you wake up from and you say, okay, I'm not ready now to go interview. I have friends and colleagues, or even some of the people who work in my organization. When I have these conversations with them, they tell me, oh, you know what, I've not refreshed my resume in 10 years. Okay. Now, that to me tells me that it's not about, you don't need to refresh your resume because you're looking for a job. You refresh your resume because it gives you a chance to periodically take stock and say, hey, you know what? Here's if I look back, here are my achievements. Here's what I've learned in that journey. What are some of the things that I'm yet to learn? What new experiences do I need to expose myself to? Right? Because you're taking stock of a situation. You're trying to take a self-stock of
mm.
saying, okay, hey, I've done this for so many years now. There's
Yeah.
nothing new for me to learn.
Yeah.
How do I take on something? I don't need to change my job to do that, right? I actually refresh my resume every 3 to 4 months, or
Mm,
maybe maximum 6 months. I do that not because I'm
mm,
sending it out for jobs. I
mm.
do that because it gives me a chance to take stock in a very short synopsis. It's a health check. It's a career health check. Even today, I advise people that,
Yeah.
right? To say, look,
Yeah.
you got to do this because that will tell you, right? Maybe you have outgrown your job. And that point I made earlier about either the job will outgrow you or you outgrow your job.
Yeah.
One of the two will happen. It will definitely happen.
Thank you so much, Ram. Ram, if you were to give a piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be?
Yeah. I would say that I would have taken more risks in terms of career choices early on compared to what I've done later in life. Okay. I would have exposed myself to more opportunities to learn by doing different things early on in my career. Okay. I stayed, for example, I stayed in the auto industry for 12 years in the beginning of my career. Now, all of them were good experience. I won't trade off some of those things for what I learned during the journey. But some of those things I did for a little too long, I think. Maybe I could have done something a little different or tried out different something.
Yeah.
But I think that's what I would tell myself, right? Take more risks early on in your career than what most people do.
Super. Thank you, and stay curious and continue to take a risk. Thank you so much, Ram, for your wisdom, for sharing your experiences, and being so kind always, always, and always. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurav. It's been a pleasure having this discussion.